What can the kings of antiquity teach us about leadership and power? In the biblical narratives, kings were not merely rulers. They were figures who shaped the destiny of their nations and left behind legacies that echoed through the centuries. It is fascinating to realize that even in their glory and wealth, many of these kings faced internal and external trials that led them either to greatness or to ruin. When we open the pages of the Bible, we are transported into a world where kings such as Saul, David, and Solomon not only governed, but also navigated intricate webs of intrigue and decisions that determined the course of Israel. The journey of Saul, the first king, offers us a glimpse of how pride and fear can transform a promising leader into a tragic figure. David, the young shepherd who defied giants, rose to the throne through battles and betrayals, striving to unify a divided kingdom. These stories are not mere accounts of power and downfall, but rich tapestries of human emotion and difficult choices. Today, as we seek guidance and inspiration, these ancient narratives continue to resonate, offering insight into leadership, morality, and the role of destiny in our lives. Welcome to the channel, A Vision of Heaven. Subscribe to explore more of these stories, tales that not only illuminate the past but also connect us to a timeless and universal wisdom. Israel lived in times of uncertainty, surrounded by enemies and constant threats. In villages and cities, the murmur of the people grew louder. It was time for a king, a leader who could guide them and protect them from the dangers that pressed upon their borders. The voice of the people rose as a unanimous cry that reached the ears of the prophet Samuel. They asked for a ruler who would bring order from chaos, someone anointed and approved by God. In his wisdom, Samuel listened to the pleas of the people and sought divine counsel. God, though fully aware of the troubles that monarchy would bring, instructed Samuel to grant the request of the Israelites. And so destiny guided Samuel to a young man named Saul from the tribe of Benjamin. Saul was an impressive man, handsome and imposing, tall and distinguished among his kin. He bore the stature and presence that seemed to mark him for leadership. Following the command of the Lord, Samuel found Saul while he was searching for his father's lost donkeys, an encounter that seemed casual but was filled with divine significance. In his simplicity, Saul could never have imagined that he was about to be chosen for the highest honor among his people. Then Samuel, in a gesture of deep meaning, poured oil upon Saul's head. It was a sacred ritual, the anointing that sealed his calling as Israel's new king. With words of encouragement, Samuel declared, "You are God's chosen one, Saul." In time, the day of coronation came, and the people of Israel gathered to behold their new leader. In an atmosphere of solemnity and expectation, Saul was presented as the first king of Israel. The people acclaimed him with one voice, their shouts resounding in approval, and the air was filled with the sense of a new beginning. Saul, now vested with power and responsibility, stepped into the challenges that awaited him. Soon one such challenge arose when the Ammonites, led by Nahash, besieged the city of Jabesh-Gilead, announcing cruel intentions and humiliating demands. The desperate inhabitants sent messengers to Gibeah, where Saul resided, pleading for help. Upon hearing the news, the Spirit of God came mightily upon Saul. With courage burning within him, he summoned the tribes of Israel to unite in a decisive action. With resolve and steadfast leadership, Saul led the Israelites on a bold march against the Ammonites. The battle that followed was fierce, but Saul showed not only military skill, but also the ability to inspire unity and courage among his people. The Ammonites, caught off guard by Saul's strategy and zeal, were utterly defeated. This victory consolidated Saul's position as leader and won him the respect of all Israel. This story of courage and leadership marked the beginning of Saul's reign, the first king of Israel, promising a hopeful future to a people longing for direction and security. David, a young shepherd whose days were filled with the vast and tranquil silence of Bethlehem's fields, spent long hours tending the flock of his father Jesse. Walking the meadows beneath the golden and gentle sun, he often meditated and sang, filling the air with melodies that resounded in purity and devotion. This quiet and seemingly ordinary life seemed far removed from palaces and political intrigues, until the day an unexpected calling transformed his path forever, revealing a destiny greater than many could comprehend. The fame and rumors about David's abilities and inner strength began to spread throughout the tribes and villages of Israel. The opportunity to prove his worth came when the Philistines, Israel's feared enemies, brought forth their champion, Goliath, who for days on end mocked and challenged the Israelites to send a man to face him in single combat. Goliath was not merely a physical threat. He embodied the arrogance and scorn of an enemy that seemed invincible. Yet, while Saul's soldiers trembled in fear, the young shepherd came to the battlefield with humility and unshakable faith in God, ready to face his destiny. The scene that unfolded on the battlefield was nothing less than epic and unforgettable. As Goliath advanced, shouting and mocking, David stood firm, sustained not by physical might, but by a faith truly extraordinary. With a simple sling and a smooth stone taken from the brook, he struck with remarkable precision. The small stone sank into Goliath's forehead, and the giant collapsed instantly, to the astonishment and rejoicing of the gathered host. This heroic feat, impossible in human eyes, not only won David the admiration of Israel, but also marked the beginning of his inexorable rise to the throne. Yet this ascent would be marked by trials both arduous and painful. Saul, then king, was consumed by envy and saw in David a growing threat. Driven by suspicion and jealousy, he pursued David relentlessly. David, however, displayed courage of another kind, wisdom in restraint and endurance. Time and again he escaped Saul's traps, all the while leading a band of loyal followers and wandering into the wilderness and caves. Through these long years of hardship, David held fast to his hope of a just and godly kingdom, founded on patience and faith. At last, after many tests of endurance, the time for David to reign arrived. With the death of Saul and his sons in a fierce battle against the Philistines, the path opened for David's destiny to be fulfilled. The tribes of Israel in unity gathered at Hebron and anointed him king over Judah. In time, his just rule and commitment to uniting the tribes brought him to be crowned king over all Israel. In Jerusalem, the city of David, flourishing in prosperity and culture, his name became a symbol of wisdom and strength, binding the nation together in faith and justice. His story transcended generations, becoming an eternal legacy in the culture and spirituality of Israel. With David's death, Israel entered a time of transition. Amidst the mourning for their beloved king, Solomon, his son, was to be crowned according to David's will. It was a time of expectation and hope, but also of looming challenges. Solomon, still young and inexperienced, now stood before the great responsibility of kingship. The coronation unfolded amidst Israel's sacred traditions and the support of the nation's leaders, eager to see the continuity of a just rule. Though young, Solomon showed determination, stepping toward the throne with the courage and confidence inherited from his father. The coronation sealed his destiny as Israel's new king, and for many it was the promise of a bright future under a ruler chosen by God. Not long after ascending the throne, Solomon had a divine encounter. In the stillness of the night, God appeared to him in a dream, offering him anything he might desire. Conscious of his inexperience and the weight of governance, Solomon made an uncommon and profoundly wise request. He asked for wisdom, for an understanding heart to govern justly. This pleased the Lord, who granted him not only unmatched wisdom, but also riches and honor he had not asked for. Thus Solomon was blessed to become the wisest king of his age. The fame of Solomon's wisdom quickly spread throughout the region, but one of the most memorable stories that tested his gift involved a dispute between two women who both claimed a child as their own. Brought before the king, their desperate cries filled the court. Solomon, in his wisdom, proposed a judgment that revealed the truth. He commanded that the child be divided in two, each woman receiving half. At once the true mother cried out, begging the king to spare the child and give him to the other woman. Solomon recognized her selfless love, and the child was delivered to her. Those who heard of it marveled at the king's discernment. At the height of his power and wisdom, Solomon undertook one of the greatest works of his reign, the construction of a magnificent temple in Jerusalem, a sanctuary dedicated to the Lord, a holy place for worship and sacrifice. This temple was not only a testament to Solomon's devotion to God, but also his vision of uniting the nation under one worship. With abundant resources, he commanded skilled artisans and gathered precious materials from across the ancient world to raise a structure worthy of the Lord's glory. When the temple was completed, it was dedicated with great joy, marked by sacrifices and prayers, a living testimony of the nation's faith and gratitude. Under the wise reign of King Solomon, Rehoboam, son of Solomon, took the throne after his father's death, but soon faced one of the greatest trials of his reign. The people of Israel, led by the northern tribes, cried out for relief from the heavy burdens and taxes imposed by Solomon during his ambitious building projects. Their discontent was undeniable, and the leaders of the tribes gathered with Rehoboam at Shechem to discuss the lessening of these tributes. At this decisive meeting, Rehoboam sought counsel on how to respond to the people's demands. On one hand, the elders, wise men who had served his father, advised him to listen to the people and show compassion, promising to lighten their burdens. They believed that, by doing so, he would win their loyalty and secure a stable kingdom. Yet the young men who had grown up alongside him counseled differently. They urged him to take a harsh stance, to increase the burdens, and to demonstrate his power. They believed that by asserting such authority, he would earn respect and secure his dominion. Choosing to follow the advice of the young men, Rehoboam declared to the people that he would not lessen their burdens, but would increase them instead. This decision ignited an immediate and fierce revolt among the northern tribes, who felt betrayed and abandoned by their ruler. In anger, 10 of the 12 tribes of Israel withdrew, rejecting Rehoboam's rule and forming their own kingdom under the leadership of Jeroboam, thus establishing the northern kingdom, also known as Israel. With this division, only the tribe of Judah, along with part of Benjamin, remained loyal to Rehoboam in Jerusalem. This marked the beginning of the fragmentation of the once united kingdom of Israel. Jerusalem, with its majestic temple built by Solomon, became the heart of the kingdom of Judah. Though Rehoboam retained control over the holy city, his authority was now confined to the territories of Judah and Benjamin. In the midst of this turmoil, a prophet of God, Shemaiah, was sent to Rehoboam. He brought a clear warning. He was not to go to war against his brethren in the north. Shemaiah declared that this division was part of God's plan, and that any attempt to reunite the kingdom by force would end in disaster. Faced with this divine warning, Rehoboam abandoned his plans of war, choosing instead to submit to the prophetic word. Thus the kingdom of Israel was divided. In the north, the kingdom of Israel under Jeroboam. In the south, the kingdom of Judah under Rehoboam. This division ushered in an age of tension and conflict between the two realms, as each sought to assert sovereignty and identity in the midst of the political and spiritual complexities of their time. Jeroboam, upon taking the throne in the north, immediately faced the monumental challenge of establishing his authority and ensuring that his people, the tribes now under his leadership, remained loyal to him. He was well aware of the powerful spiritual and political influence of Jerusalem, which remained under the rule of the house of David. The city was not only the center of worship, but also a symbol of Israel's unity and faith. With this in mind, Jeroboam set out to implement bold changes to redefine the religious and cultural identity of his kingdom. Determined to sever the northern kingdom from the transcendent pull of Jerusalem, Jeroboam devised the plan of creating alternate places of worship. He chose Bethel and Dan as new religious centers, strategically located for easy access to the people. There he built altars that would become the focal points of worship. The choice of these sites was deliberate. Bethel already carried spiritual and historic significance, while Dan served as a convenient center for those in the far north. The purpose of these altars was clear: to provide the people of the north with nearby sanctuaries, rendering the need to travel to Jerusalem obsolete. Jeroboam believed that by offering these alternatives, he would secure both political stability and the loyalty of his people, fostering a sense of independence and unique identity among the northern tribes. Yet, in his quest for control, Jeroboam made a fateful and grievous choice. He introduced idolatry. He commissioned golden calves to be placed in these sanctuaries, giving form to a worship that could rival the grandeur of Jerusalem's temple. These idols quickly became symbols of rupture with the ancient traditions, deepening the divide not only between the north and the south, but also within the northern tribes themselves. This innovation stirred great unrest among the Levites, the tribe entrusted with the sacred duties of teaching and worship in Israel. Bound to the Mosaic law, which commanded loyalty to the invisible God without image, the Levites found Jeroboam's idolatry intolerable. Unable to remain, they migrated south to Judah, where they could continue their ministry in accordance with their faith. The loss of the Levites was a heavy blow to Jeroboam. Without them, the north was deprived of its spiritual teachers and guardians of God's law. While Judah grew stronger with the arrival of the Levites, the north weakened, straying ever further from the path established under David and Solomon. As these events unfolded, the northern kingdom drifted not only from the traditions of its fathers, but also from the divine promise given to the house of David. Jeroboam's bold decision to establish new centers of worship and new practices severed ties with Jerusalem, fragmenting political unity and distorting the spiritual identity that had long been Israel's anchor. The nation, now divided into two kingdoms with different practices, ideals, and spiritual destinies, trembled under the weight of its complex and tumultuous history. The introduction of idolatry, in an effort to consolidate power and identity, ultimately created a spiritual and moral abyss, redefining the boundaries not only of a kingdom, but also of a heritage that had once rested securely under the unity of one God and one temple. In this boiling scenario, the path toward Israel's future was being paved by decisions that would resonate for generations, forever transforming the destiny of this ancient people. Ahab, king of Israel, married Jezebel, princess of Sidon, whose devotion to Baal, the god of the Phoenicians, was fervent and relentless. It was not merely the union of two people. It was the alliance of two cultures, two forms of worship. Jezebel, with her tenacious spirit, brought with her not only her faith, but also a new religious fervor that soon began to corrode Israel's traditional practices. Ahab, under the growing influence of his wife, allowed a temple to Baal to be built in Samaria, the capital of his kingdom. It would not be a small sanctuary, but a majestic center of worship that directly challenged Israel's tradition of worshiping only the God of their ancestors. The columns of the temple rose as a provocation to the heavens, while the sound of chants and sacrifices echoed across the land, destroying the peace that once had reigned there. This foundation shook the very core of the kingdom's spirituality, representing a clear departure from the faith that had sustained the people for generations. As if this were not enough, Jezebel began to systematically eradicate the prophets and religious leaders who opposed her idolatrous worship, imprisoning or killing those who dared to resist. The scene was being painted in the colors of fear and oppression, as more and more altars to Baal appeared under the cover of royal authority. Yet opposition soon manifested itself in a powerful way. Then came Elijah, a prophet known for his burning passion and unshakable courage. He directly challenged the many prophets of Baal in an epic confrontation on Mount Carmel. The tension of that morning was palpable as crowds gathered to witness the duel between the true faith of Israel and the practices introduced by Jezebel. Elijah, alone against 450 prophets of Baal, launched the challenge that would echo for generations. The God who answers by fire. He is God. The prophets of Baal cried out to their God, danced with fervor, but the heavens remained silent and indifferent. Elijah, on the other hand, prayed with simplicity and fervor. Fire descended from heaven, consuming with divine heat the altar drenched with water that he had prepared, silencing every doubt about the supremacy of the God of Israel. This triumph was not merely a miracle, but a reaffirmation of the ancient faith lost amidst foreign influence. Still, Ahab stood at a crossroads. His leadership was criticized not only by the religious, but also by those who saw in the worship of Baal a betrayal of their ancestral legacy. His critics claimed that following pagan practices was like abandoning their own history, trading ancestral promises for fleeting alliances. Amid this storm of opinions and judgments, King Ahab faced a choice that would define his reign and shape the spiritual destiny of his kingdom. Return to the ways of his fathers, or continue under the influence of Jezebel, his queen. The story of Ahab and Jezebel, of their worship of Baal, and Elijah's challenge resounds as a reminder of the power of devotion and the danger of turning away from spiritual roots in pursuit of convenient alliances. Amid these complexities, the destiny of a nation and the faith of its people remained at stake, as the plot continued to unfold in the mountains, the valleys, and in the hearts of all who still sought the truth. Ahab, determined to expand his dominion and consolidate his power, decided it was time to wage war against Ramoth-Gilead, a territory long disputed between Israel and Syria. He felt that this conquest would strengthen his position as king and restore his prestige before the people. For such an endeavor, he allied with Jehoshaphat, king of Judah, forming an alliance that seemed militarily advantageous. As he planned the campaign, Ahab sought counsel among his prophets. But there was one prophet who reluctantly spoke the truth, even when it went against the king's desire. Micaiah, known for his unmatched honesty, was summoned. When pressed to prophesy, he spoke enigmatically yet clearly. The battle would bring disaster. He described a vision in which Israel's army would be scattered like sheep without a shepherd. In the depths, a grim reality loomed before Ahab. Despite the ominous warning, Ahab disregarded Micaiah's words, determined in his decision to go to war. His mind was fixed on victory and the promise of territorial expansion. Certain that triumph would bring glory to his reign and reinforce his court's political influence, he ignored the prophecy of destruction, even aware of the possible consequences. The battle at Ramoth-Gilead was fierce and chaotic. Ahab, perhaps sensing the danger, attempted to deceive fate. He disguised himself so as not to be recognized as king, hoping to confuse the enemy and avoid being directly targeted. Meanwhile, the fighting raged furiously around him. In the heat of battle, a random arrow shot by the enemy found its mark, striking Ahab between the joints of his armor. The king, gravely wounded, felt life draining from his body. His orders were brief. He asked his charioteer to hold him upright in his chariot as the conflict raged on, unwilling for his army to lose heart. For hours Ahab endured, blood slowly flowing from the wound that consumed his strength. The metallic taste of defeat mingled with the blood in his mouth as he confronted the reality prophesied by Micaiah. At last, just as the prophet had foretold, night fell over the battlefield and over the king's life. With his final breath, Ahab died in his chariot, his victory unrealized, his position unstrengthened. The people of Israel, upon hearing of their king's death, faltered, and their return was marked by sorrow and dismay. Ahab, a king whose decisions had shaped the destiny of the kingdom, met his end in a manner he may have already anticipated, even if he never admitted it to himself. This tragic chapter marked not only the fate of Ahab, but also the destiny of a kingdom wrestling with its own choices and alliances. The silence after the battle was deep and heavy, reflecting the loss and uncertainty that hung over the land and its people. Jehu was chosen to complete a crucial mission to exterminate the house of Ahab. This calling did not arise by chance. It was a divine command delivered to him through the prophet Elisha, passed on by one of the sons of the prophets. Jehu's heart must have pounded as he received such a charge, fully aware of its magnitude and risk. Yet there was no hesitation. Jehu knew this task was not merely a political reckoning, but a direct intervention of God in the history of Israel. Soon after being anointed in secret, destiny began to unfold unmistakably. Jehu's comrades at Ramoth-Gilead, soldiers who had fought beside him, could not ignore the significant change that had taken place. Curious about the messenger's presence and the haste with which he had departed, the men pressed Jehu to explain what had occurred. Still reluctant to share the news, perhaps because of the weight it carried, Jehu revealed what had been declared. He had been proclaimed king of Israel. Without hesitation, the soldiers at Ramoth-Gilead responded with enthusiasm to the unexpected news. The acclamation of Jehu as king did not wait for pompous ceremonies. Right there on the battlefield, an improvised throne was set up, and Jehu was hailed with triumph, standing on a staircase, as the sound of trumpets and cries of "Jehu is king" filled the air. This vibrant, spontaneous scene sealed the fate of Ahab's dynasty. Determined to fulfill the divine mission, Jehu wasted no time. He set out with his retinue, advancing toward Jezreel, where Ahab's royal family resided. It was a swift, determined march that left no doubt about Jehu's intentions. His arrival was marked by an aura of inevitability, a force that seemed beyond mere military decision. The tension rose as Jehu entered Jezreel. He knew he needed to eliminate not only those immediately connected to Ahab, but also to eradicate the worship of Baal, which had taken root in Israel. With determination, and perhaps with a sternness demanded by the justice of his mission, Jehu began to strike down the worshippers of Baal. It was a decisive action that, though violent, was necessary to fulfill what had been commanded. The spiritual cleansing of Israel was a monumental endeavor, one that meant more than simply the end of a corrupt reign. It represented an attempt to restore true faith and to realign the nation with the paths set before them since ancient times. Jehu, as an instrument of the divine, stood at the center of this redirection of history. While chaos and tumult followed his steps, Jehu pressed forward with the mission entrusted to him, reminding all that the hand of God still guided the affairs of men, and the destiny of his people was in the hands of one who had the courage to follow this call to the end. Joash began his reign at a very young age, ascending the throne of Judah at only 7 years old. During these early years, Joash relied on the faithful guidance of the priest Jehoiada, who played a crucial role in his governance, helping him navigate the complexities of leadership and administration in a time of uncertainty. Under Jehoiada's watch, Joash learned to honor the traditions of his ancestors and to follow the ways established by God for his people. As time passed, Joash observed the damage and neglect that had befallen the temple of the Lord. The temple, which should have been the spiritual heart of the nation, lay in ruins, a reflection of the years of disregard and destruction brought about by previous reigns. Determined to restore the honor and glory of the temple, Joash made an important decision. He commanded that the funds collected through the people's offerings be devoted exclusively to the work of restoration. Joash ordered a chest to be placed at the entrance of the temple, where the people could deposit their contributions. With a sense of responsibility and a sincere desire to see the temple renewed, he oversaw the collection of the necessary resources. When the money began to accumulate, Joash and Jehoiada, along with the other temple leaders, used the resources to hire carpenters, masons, and skilled workers. These men devoted themselves to repairing the walls, replacing decayed sections, and working on the fine details that made the temple a masterpiece. Weeks passed, and under the tireless diligence of the workers and the attentive supervision of Joash, the temple began to take on a new form. Stones worn down by time were replaced with solid blocks, and rotting wood gave way to new, sturdy beams. Each chisel strike into stone, each firm hammer blow into the beams, contributed to the sublime renewal of the temple. The sanctuary, once hauntingly silent, began to pulse again with life and light, echoing hope and promise among the people. After this fervent period of restoration, the temple once more shone in splendor. It stood renewed, not only as a physical structure, but as a tangible sign of the spiritual renewal Joash intended to bring to Judah. Celebrations marked this rededication. The people gathered in the courts with music and singing, the altar's fire blazing brightly as in the days of old. Joash's dedication and Jehoiada's cooperation did not go unnoticed, and the memory of this zealous restoration was engraved upon the minds of a generation. Under Joash's reign, with the temple restored, worship and festivity found their way back into the hearts of the people, a significant step toward renewed faith and restored hope in the Lord. Amaziah, king of Judah, looked upon his kingdom and saw the opportunity to expand his influence. He knew that to the south lay Edom, a land rich in resources and strategically important. Determined to secure his nation's power, Amaziah chose the path of war to subdue the Edomites and extend the borders of his realm. Thus, he gathered his commanders and laid out his plan of attack. Troops were summoned, and preparations for battle took shape. The soldiers of Amaziah, trained and ready for combat, lined up on the plains of Judah under their king's vigilant eye. Amaziah, clad in shining armor, led his army southward. The Edomite lands soon appeared on the horizon, their mountains and ravines formidable obstacles for any army. The atmosphere in the camp was one of determination. Each soldier knew the importance of the campaign, not only for glory, but also for the future security of their people. As they approached enemy territory, Amaziah ordered his army into strategic positions, seizing the higher ground to their advantage. When battle was joined, it was fierce and unrelenting. The clash of steel resounded, arrows cut through the sky, and the cries of warriors filled the air. Amaziah, in the midst of his men, led with courage and skill, urging his soldiers to press forward against the Edomites. At last, after a grueling struggle, the Edomites faltered and gave way. Amaziah's forces pressed without retreat, and the enemies, overwhelmed by the strength and determination of Judah's men, were defeated. The victory was certain, though dearly bought. Both sides had lost many brave warriors. Even so, the triumph brought a wave of relief and pride upon Amaziah's troops. With the Edomites subdued, Amaziah turned his attention to the city of Saul, a stronghold of great importance in the region. He knew its capture would be a decisive marker of his campaign. Without delay, he ordered his victorious army to march upon the city. Its defenses, weakened and disorganized after previous defeats, could not withstand the onslaught. With strategy and resolve, Amaziah led his forces until Selah fell into his hands. The city was taken, its gates opened to Judah's army. The victory solidified Amaziah's position as a strong and determined monarch. He had not only subdued his enemies, but also greatly expanded the reach and influence of his kingdom. In the land of Edom, new horizons opened for Judah. This conquest brought not only greater security, but also bore witness to the strength and purpose Amaziah carried as king. Under his leadership, Judah could envision a more promising future, with expanded borders and greater stability. Uzziah, son of Amaziah, emerged as one of Judah's most notable leaders. He observed his father's legacy and understood that the kingdom's security and stability were vital. Determined to strengthen Judah further, Uzziah focused on the army. Under his leadership, the army was reorganized and expanded. Men from across the kingdom were called to train and prepare, not only to defend their borders, but also to safeguard Judah's legacy. One of Uzziah's great achievements was the construction of strong fortifications. He recognized that the kingdom's strength lay not only in the number of soldiers, but also in the defenses that shielded them. He commanded towers and walls to be built in strategic locations, ensuring close vigilance against external threats. These fortifications were not merely tools of defense, but also symbols of Judah's resilience and determination under his command. Beyond defensive measures, Uzziah stood out for his innovation in weaponry. He brought inventors and skilled artisans into his court, challenging them to create more effective arms. Under his guidance, engines were developed that could hurl large stones and arrows with deadly precision in battle. These innovations gave Judah's army a tactical advantage, a crucial factor in facing enemy forces on the battlefield. With a strengthened and well-equipped army, Uzziah turned his eyes beyond the borders of Judah. The neighboring lands, often in disorder or weakened by internal disputes, became potential targets for expansion. Under his command, the forces of Judah struck with surgical precision, using their new power to reclaim territories once out of reach. One example was the successful campaign against the Philistines, long-standing enemies, where Uzziah captured and fortified their territories, ensuring the security of vital trade routes. But Uzziah did not stop there. He knew that for Judah to remain secure and prosperous, the borders had to be secured and, where possible, extended. Under his guidance, campaigns were launched westward and southward, bringing new lands under Judah's control. Each victory consolidated his power and influenced regional politics, establishing Judah as a force to be respected. The leadership of Uzziah had a profound and lasting impact on the history of Judah. He brought not only security but also prosperity through his military and administrative actions. With expanded borders and an improved defense infrastructure, the kingdom of Judah remained resilient against external threats, and its influence grew throughout the region. While his military conquests defined his era, they also inspired his people, transforming fear into confidence and uncertainty into hope. Under Uzziah, Judah was safer than ever, ready to face future challenges with renewed determination and faith in its destiny as a chosen nation. In the shadow of his achievements, the people found new purpose, ensuring that Uzziah's legacy would endure for generations. Ahaz, king of Judah, felt the unbearable weight of responsibility on his shoulders, a burden that seemed to grow heavier each day under the relentless sun of the Middle East. The looming threat of the Assyrian Empire grew ever larger, its dark shadows stretching across the lands of the Near East. Rumors of the Assyrians' brutal conquests, whispered from mouth to mouth, swept through the land like a cold, cutting wind, bringing reports of burned villages and subjugated populations. Known for their overwhelming power and inhuman cruelty in battle, the Assyrians left only a trail of devastation wherever they passed, their legions drawing a grim future for any nation that dared oppose them. Ahaz, seated upon his carved throne, knew the threat was real and imminent, like a storm ready to break upon Judah. Faced with this terrifying prospect, he was convinced, with every beat of his heart, that faith and prayers alone would not be enough to protect his beloved people. Desperate in his search for a lasting solution, Ahaz made the monumental decision that would mark his leadership forever: to seek help from Assyria itself. He knew the risks, for in doing so, he would transform Judah into a vassal state, submitting his land to the demands of a vast and merciless empire whose reach stretched like a boundless sea. In exchange for the much-needed protection, Ahaz sent valuable tributes, plundering the sacred treasures of the temple of God itself. This act, though pragmatic in the eyes of political survival, was a bold step that began to lead Judah away from its ancestral and genuine devotion. As Ahaz sealed his fateful pact with Tiglath-Pileser III, the feared king of Assyria, the spiritual consequences of this alliance slowly began to unfold in Judah. With Assyrian influence growing, idolatry spread like an unquenchable fire, sweeping through the streets of Jerusalem and its surroundings with flames of invisible destruction. Pagan altars sprouted along the roads like weeds, while images of foreign gods became as common as the dust in the air, threatening to corrupt the faith that for centuries had kept the people united and devoted. In the bustling markets, filled with voices and diverse aromas, the spiritual atmosphere changed rapidly. The hum of ancient stories and teachings passed down through generations was now at risk of being drowned out by foreign practices and traditions that invaded the local culture. The alliance with Assyria may have brought a precious, though temporary, truce, but in the eyes of many, the price was unbearably high. The identity of Judah, built upon the promise of one true God, was being swiftly threatened with extinction. Ahaz, in his luxurious palace, watched with weary eyes the frightening transformation of his kingdom. The superficial peace purchased with Assyrian aid was nothing more than a thin veil over a deepening unrest. And each night he tossed upon his bed of worries, plagued by relentless doubts about the choices he had made. Tension grew between those who still fervently believed in the promises of Yahweh and those who bowed before the foreign pantheon. What had begun as a desperate quest for safety now revealed itself as a cunning trap, an invisible prison that could sever Judah from its roots so painstakingly cultivated for generations. Yet in the midst of this intricate web of political and spiritual decisions, there might still have been a spark of hope. Ahaz faced the harsh reality that Judah's challenge was not only military, but also moral and spiritual, a battle for the very soul of the nation. As he pondered, his gaze fixed on the uncertain horizon, Judah continued its search for a path, teetering precariously on the edge of a new era. Years of history and tradition cried out to be remembered, and in the shadows of the temple, in the echoing voices of the prophets, and within the troubled heart of Ahaz himself, that ancestral call still resounded with unshakable strength. Hezekiah, king of Judah, faced a moment of trial. Suddenly, his health deteriorated gravely, leaving him bedridden and distressed. The pain he felt was not only physical, but also emotional, for he knew that his people depended upon his leadership in increasingly difficult times. The weight of his possible absence in Judah pressed heavily upon his soul. In the midst of his torment, the prophet Isaiah came to him, bringing a message of great importance. Isaiah, known for his integrity and communion with God, was seen as a bridge between heaven and earth in Judah. Entering the chamber where Hezekiah lay, Isaiah's presence brought mixed signs of hope and apprehension. He announced to the king that he should set his house in order, for his death was near. Hezekiah heard those words with a heavy heart, feeling the weight of what seemed to be a final decree. Yet Hezekiah did not resign himself to accept that fate immediately. In an act of deep faith and desperation, he turned to the wall of his room and began to pray fervently. His prayer, laden with emotion, echoed throughout the palace. Hezekiah pleaded with the Lord, reminding him of his constant devotion and the righteous deeds he had done throughout his reign. He asked only for more time to continue governing Judah and to protect his people. As Hezekiah poured out his soul in prayer, something remarkable happened. Before Isaiah had even left the palace, the voice of God came to him again. God, moved by the sincerity and unwavering faith of Hezekiah, sent a new message through Isaiah. The prophet immediately returned to the king, bearing news that many would describe as a miracle. Isaiah announced to Hezekiah that God had heard his plea. Though the prospect of his death had been made clear earlier, the Lord, in his infinite mercy, chose to extend Hezekiah's life. He would live for another 15 years, a precious gift of time for one who believed the end was near. This promise not only brought relief and joy to Hezekiah, but also renewed his faith, strengthening him spiritually to face the challenges ahead. Hezekiah's recovery was swift and secure, a tangible proof of the power and grace of God. He rose from his bed with a renewed sense of mission, determined to use his extra years of life to lead Judah along paths of righteousness and dedication to the Lord. The confidence of the inhabitants of Judah in their king was restored, and many saw in this divine response a reaffirmation of the covenant between God and his people, a reminder that they had not been forgotten. With the return of his health, Hezekiah also engaged in projects that would strengthen Judah not only militarily but spiritually. He sought to revive devotion to the one true God, turning away from foreign influences and restoring the traditional worship that his ancestors had followed for generations. This extra time gave him the opportunity to prepare his kingdom to face the future with renewed strength. Manasseh, the young king of Judah, began his reign by making decisions that turned him away from the path of his godly forefathers. He built altars to idols throughout Jerusalem, an act that stood in deep contrast to the teachings of his father, Hezekiah. Those altars, dedicated to foreign deities, were raised in places once consecrated to the God of Israel, leading the people away from their spiritual traditions. Manasseh plunged deeply into idolatry, scorning the warnings of the prophets and the traditions that had guided his people for generations. His acts revealed contempt for the ancient covenants, and his heart seemed hardened and distant. Voices inside and outside the palace pleaded for change, but he ignored them, convinced that his new path would bring prosperity. Yet the consequences of his actions came swiftly. Manasseh was captured by the commanders of the Assyrian army, a mighty nation that threatened Judah's borders. Bound in chains and carried off to a foreign land, the king endured a time of anguish and isolation. In captivity, far from his throne and his followers, Manasseh found himself stripped of the luxuries and securities to which he had been accustomed, confronted by the harsh reality of his choices. During his time in prison, reflection began to stir within him. Memories of his father's teachings and the inspiring stories of his childhood came to mind in the loneliness of cold nights. It was a period of deep introspection, and in the midst of despair, Manasseh began to perceive the emptiness his deeds had created. The weight of guilt led him to remember the God his father had so faithfully honored. At last, broken by the experience and by the recognition of his sins, Manasseh turned to the Lord in prayer. In his cell he prostrated himself in sincere repentance, crying out for forgiveness and mercy. His prayer was deep and humble, acknowledging the devastation he had caused and begging for another chance. Somehow, the weight of his transgressions began to lift, and what emerged was a transformed king, a man with a renewed heart. To the surprise of many, Manasseh was released from captivity and returned to Jerusalem. Stepping once more on his own land, a sense of purpose came upon him. He immediately began a process of restoration, tearing down the pagan altars he himself had built. The city, under his renewed guidance, began to realign with the ancient ways, turning away from influences that had only brought shallow prosperity. Manasseh, once astray, returned to the heart of his community and to the heart of his God. Continuing in his repentance, Manasseh restored the worship of the God of Israel and regained the respect and trust of his people. He now understood the lessons of his journey, dedicating his final years to repairing what had been lost. Under this renewed light, Judah began to rediscover its true spiritual identity, inspired by the astonishing transformation of its leader. When Josiah became king of Judah, the people could scarcely imagine the changes about to unfold. One day, in his efforts to restore the temple of the Lord, he ordered that repairs be made to the house of God, which had been neglected by his predecessors. During this work, something extraordinary happened. Hilkiah, the high priest, discovered an ancient book covered in dust, hidden in the forgotten corners of the temple. Hilkiah immediately recognized the importance of his discovery. It was the Book of the Law, an ancient scroll containing the commandments and instructions given to Moses for the people of Israel. This was not just any document. It was the spiritual foundation upon which the nation had been built. With renewed reverence, Hilkiah brought the book to Shaphan the scribe, who read it and then presented it to King Josiah. When Josiah heard the words written, he was struck with alarm and deep emotion. The impact of the revelation was like lightning, cutting through the layers of corruption and deviation that had infected Judah. He tore his garments as a sign of lamentation and grief, recognizing how far his people had strayed from God's ways. He understood at once that Judah was in danger of suffering the curses foretold in the sacred text because of their disobedience. Determined to change the course of his nation, Josiah summoned all the elders and leaders of the people to gather at the temple. There, with the book in hand, he ordered that the law be read aloud before all who were present. The echo of those ancient words filled the sacred space, stirring the hearts of all who listened. It was as if God himself was speaking again to his people, reminding them of the lost covenant and the call to faithfulness. Through this action, not only was Josiah's attention fixed upon the law, but he inspired a spiritual renewal throughout the kingdom of Judah, a spirit of repentance and a yearning to return to the ancient traditions spread among the people. They remembered the days of obedience and blessing under rulers who walked in the ways of the Lord. In response to Josiah's broken heart and his devoted leadership, the customs were restored, the idols removed, and the temple was purified once more. The murmurs of the Levites' songs began to resound in Jerusalem, while sacrifices and offerings to God again became common among the families. The effect of this renewal was not limited to religious practice. It became a call to a people who sought the true meaning of their identity. Josiah, leading with faith and courage, planted the seeds of a transformation that changed the spiritual destiny of his generation. The king and his people, under the light of the rediscovered law, began once again to walk the path of divine purpose, returning to the principles that had been nearly forgotten. Jehoahaz, son of Josiah, was about to face a destiny many would consider abrupt and deeply unjust. After the death of his father, a revered king who had implemented significant reforms in Judah, Jehoahaz was chosen to ascend the throne. The atmosphere surrounding him, warmed by the memories of Josiah's visionary acts, was filled with great expectation and hope that the covenant with God would continue to flourish. During Josiah's reign, the religious renewal had been a bright light for Judah, bringing promises of restoration and spiritual prosperity. The nation, animated by a revived faith, longed for a future in which its divine identity would be even more firmly established. Yet the peace and stability so painstakingly secured during Josiah's years were about to be shaken suddenly and violently by forces beyond the control of Jehoahaz or Judah. The young king had little time to adapt to his new role or to implement any plan of government. His reign lasted only 3 brief months, far too short to consolidate his leadership or perpetuate his father's legacy. The shadow of Egypt loomed threateningly over the region like a predator in wait, and soon Pharaoh Necho moved decisively in line with his expansionist aims. Pharaoh Necho, a shrewd and ambitious ruler, advanced his forces with speed and determination, setting his sights directly on Jehoahaz. To him, Judah was not merely a territory, but a strategic piece on the board of regional domination. With an unrelenting army, Pharaoh captured Jehoahaz, removing him abruptly from his throne and carrying him away as a prisoner to Egypt, stripping Judah of its young and promising leader. Picture the scene. A youthful king, forced to leave behind his home and the security of his reign, now facing the unknown in a foreign land, with no chance to prove his worth as a ruler or to implement anything that might benefit his nation. As Jehoahaz was led away to Egypt, a wave of uncertainty swept over Judah. The kingdom, now bereft of its king, had to face the harsh realities imposed by Egypt's aggressive foreign policy. Seizing the moment of instability and lack of leadership, Pharaoh laid a heavy tribute upon Judah. This demand was more than a transfer of wealth. It was a constant and painful reminder of Judah's fragile independence. Payments of gold and silver not only drained the nation's resources, but also corroded the spirit of a people who felt once again subjugated by distant foreign powers, estranged from their God and their customs. The absence of Jehoahaz left a deep void, not only in leadership, but also in the spirit of the people. Under the grip of foreign influence, Judah's future seemed stolen away. The hope that had once shone so brightly in the days of Josiah began to fade as Judah struggled with the harsh political and economic consequences of its new reality. With Pharaoh dictating the fate of the nation, the devastating impact of this shift in rule was impossible to ignore. The story of Jehoahaz breathes with a sense of despair, underscored by the sorrow of how swiftly events unfolded. The capture of Jehoahaz and the tribute imposed by Pharaoh Necho were not merely political setbacks. They were bitter lessons about the volatility of power and the speed with which balance can collapse. The narrative that had once promised spiritual renewal and faithful leadership was replaced with one of submission and tribulation. The tides of political change in the region showed no sign of ceasing, as Judah cautiously navigated times of growing uncertainty and trial. Jehoiakim, another son of Josiah, found himself in dark days as he ascended the throne of Judah. At only 25 years old, he inherited the crown at a moment when the looming threat of Babylon already cast its shadow over the land. Not long after he assumed the kingship, Jehoiakim felt the crushing weight of the Babylonian Empire. Under the leadership of Nebuchadnezzar, Babylon was expanding its borders, and Judah lay directly in its path. Jerusalem was not only significant for its history and culture, but also a strategic piece on the geopolitical chessboard of that era. Imagine Nebuchadnezzar, an imposing ruler known for his cunning and determination, setting his gaze upon Jerusalem as yet another fortress to be seized in his ambitious campaign. He was not inclined to compromise. With his powerful army, he marched toward the holy city, leaving a trail of intimidation and threat. In a world where military might dictated the fate of nations, Jehoiakim and his people stood in a place of great vulnerability. Pressed under the strength of Babylon, Jehoiakim had no choice but to yield to the empire. He was forced to pay a heavy tribute to Babylon, a burden that meant more than the transfer of wealth. It was the anguished price of the nation's survival. Gold and silver became the currency of political existence, but the moral and spiritual cost was heavier still. With each tribute paid, Judah's sovereignty slipped further away, its identity and autonomy diluted under foreign domination. The city of Jerusalem, long accustomed to being the center of vibrant faith and a symbol of divine purpose, now endured a season of deep trial. Under Babylonian rule, the temples that once resounded with songs of praise became places of whispered prayers for deliverance and hope. The people of Judah, wounded in their pride and strength, walked streets weighed down by the presence of invaders, striving to keep alive the flame of an identity that seemed on the verge of extinction. Jehoiakim, in his efforts to govern under these oppressive conditions, embodied the delicate balance between compromise and resistance. He walked a narrow line between loyalty to his people and the need to pacify a foreign superpower. Every decision carried the potential for greater calamity, and his reign became, in a sense, a metaphor for the precarious destiny of his entire people during those turbulent years. Thus, the reign of Jehoiakim became a continuous test of endurance and adaptability in times of extreme upheaval. Jerusalem, under Babylon's yoke, sought equilibrium in a reality it had not chosen, dreaming perhaps of days when it might once again walk by its own light, free from the shadows of all domination. On every street corner, in every ancient stone wall, echoed the longing for a return to days when faith, and not fear, charted the course of Judah. Zedekiah, the last king of Judah, lived under relentless pressure and uncertainty. After the death of Jehoiakim, he ascended the throne with hopes of regaining his people's independence. Yet the Babylonian grip upon Judah was overwhelming, and Nebuchadnezzar's presence was a constant source of fear and oppression. Seeking escape from this dire reality, Zedekiah embarked upon a desperate attempt to flee. With the Babylonian siege tightening day by day, the nights grew long and heavy with dread for Zedekiah. One dark midnight, under the veil of shadows and amidst the chaos consuming the city, he made his move. Hoping to evade capture, Zedekiah and his small retinue slipped through the streets of Jerusalem, seeking a path to freedom. They were determined to leave behind a city on the brink of destruction. But the escape failed. The Babylonian forces, ever vigilant and unyielding, were one step ahead. It did not take long before Zedekiah was captured near Jericho. His dream of escape, and perhaps of saving his people from impending catastrophe, dissolved into a cruel mirage. Now, in the hands of his enemies, he faced the fate he had most dreaded. The capture of Zedekiah sealed Jerusalem's doom. The Babylonians, ruthless in their mission, advanced with fury upon the city. Mighty walls and once impregnable gates proved powerless against the wrath of the invaders. In an unrelenting march, they poured into the heart of the holy city, where destruction and desolation awaited. Nothing escaped Babylon's wrath. The temple, the spiritual center and symbol of hope and identity for the people of Judah, was plundered and then set ablaze. The flames that rose to the heavens carried away more than wood and stone. They bore with them the dreams and prayers of a nation. Everything Jerusalem represented, its history, its glory, was reduced to ashes, consumed by the unstoppable fire of the conquerors. With the city in ruins, many of its inhabitants were led away in chains. Families torn apart, bound together, forced to march into an unknown destiny. The grief of separation echoed through the ruins, a lament of shattered lives and hopes reduced to nothing. The fall of Jerusalem marked Judah's final submission to Babylonian rule. The city that had once been the beating heart of a vibrant nation now lay under the complete control of foreign enemies. Judah's sovereignty dissolved into the winds of history, while its people walked as exiles, dreaming of an uncertain return to their devastated land. The ruin of Jerusalem was more than the loss of a city. It was the end of an era, a somber chapter in the turbulent saga of the people of Judah. In the vastness of the Babylonian Empire, Nebuchadnezzar, one of the most powerful monarchs of his age, was troubled by a singular dream. One night, he beheld before him a colossal statue. Its head was made of pure gold, its chest and arms of shining silver, its belly and thighs of gleaming bronze, and its legs of solid iron. Curiously, its feet were a mixture of iron and clay. This vision was not merely intriguing, it was terrifying, laden with the symbolism he could not comprehend. Restless and without answers, Nebuchadnezzar summoned his wise men and magicians to the palace, demanding that they not only interpret the dream, but recount to him what he had seen, a demand that left them all in despair. The royal court stood silent, unable to meet the king's command. In this moment, Daniel, a young man of Judah, stepped forward. Gifted with wisdom beyond the ordinary, he presented himself to Nebuchadnezzar, assuring him that his God would reveal what was hidden. Daniel began to describe the dream with precision, recounting the majesty of that statue, from the golden head down to the feet of iron and clay. Then he revealed the profound meaning hidden behind the stunning vision. The statue was a representation of kingdoms that would rule the earth, each symbolized by a different part of the figure itself. The head of gold represented the empire ruled by Nebuchadnezzar, Babylon, solid and rich. Then, the chest and arms of silver pointed to a kingdom that would come afterward, lesser in splendor, yet still powerful. The belly and thighs of bronze signified another empire, which would hold dominion, though not with the same brilliance as those before it. Finally, the legs of iron, mingled with feet of iron and clay, symbolized a divided kingdom, partly strong, partly weak, destined to appear upon the horizon of history. But the dream did not end with the statue standing firm. A stone, cut without human hands, suddenly appeared and struck the feet of the colossal figure, shattering them completely. The massive statue collapsed, reduced to dust, carried away by the wind like chaff in the summer breeze. Yet that stone, small and seemingly insignificant, grew until it became a great mountain that filled the whole earth. Daniel explained that the stone represented an eternal kingdom, a dominion that would not be destroyed, nor ever handed over to another people. This kingdom would endure forever, triumphing over all former empires established by the hand of the Creator himself. As Daniel spoke, silence overtook the royal hall. Nebuchadnezzar, a ruler accustomed to triumphant proclamations, found himself humbled before the interpretation that unveiled a certain and inevitable future. The vision not only clarified the complexities of nations and power, but revealed a divine plan transcending all human glory. This dream, once an unfathomable mystery, became a herald of sweeping historical and spiritual change, a story of kingdoms that would fall, and the promise of an everlasting kingdom carved in stone, standing as testimony for ages to come. Amid the splendor of Babylon's royal palace, Belshazzar, a descendant of Nebuchadnezzar, prepared a lavish banquet. Nobles and leaders from across the empire gathered, delighting in the finest provisions the kingdom could offer. The tables overflowed with delicacies, and wine flowed freely, filling golden goblets and lifting the spirits of the revelers. The opulent halls gleamed with the wealth and power of Babylon. At the height of the celebration, as music and laughter swirled through the air, Belshazzar commanded that the sacred goblets of gold and silver, taken from the temple of Jerusalem by Nebuchadnezzar, be brought forth. He and his guests drank from them, raising toasts to the gods of gold, silver, bronze, iron, wood, and the stone. The atmosphere brimmed with excess and irreverence, a vivid picture of arrogance and contempt for the holy. Suddenly, a chilling change swept through a hall. On the plaster of the wall opposite the great lampstand, a mysterious hand appeared, writing glowing words with terrifying clarity. The hand traced letters no one could understand. Belshazzar's heart froze with fear. His face turned pale. His legs shook, and his knees knocked together. The festive hall fell into silence, the sound of revelry extinguished by the weight of the supernatural. In panic, the king summoned his wise men, astrologers, and diviners, promising wealth and honors to whoever could interpret the writing. But no one could. Confusion deepened as the strange inscription remained a mystery, the air thick with dread. Then the queen mother, remembering Daniel, spoke of him to Belshazzar. She reminded the king of a man once known for unparalleled wisdom, who had aided Nebuchadnezzar in days gone by. Daniel, now advanced in years, was summoned to the palace. Calm and resolute, he entered the trembling hall, rejecting the rewards offered, but ready to speak the truth of the vision. He declared that the words inscribed were Mene, Mene, Tekel, Parsin. Each carried a divine decree. Mene meant that God had numbered the days of Belshazzar's reign and brought it to an end. Tekel meant that he had been weighed on the scales and found wanting. Parsin meant that his kingdom would be divided and given to the Medes and Persians. The revelation struck like a blow. Belshazzar, once exulting in pride, now heard the announcement of his kingdom's downfall. That very night, while the last echoes of the feast lingered in the corridors, Babylon's fate was sealed. The mighty empire crumbled, fulfilling the words written upon the wall, a solemn reminder that all human power has limits set by God. Cyrus the Great, king of Persia, advanced with unmatched strength and strategy, conquering Babylon's towering walls and seizing the heart of the empire. The once mighty city now fell under Persian rule. For the people subdued by Babylon, it was the dawn of a new chapter, none more hopeful than the Israelites, who longed for freedom and a return to their homeland. Cyrus revealed himself not only as a conqueror, but as a liberator. He issued a decree allowing the Israelites to return to their land and rebuild the temple of the Lord in Jerusalem. His edict, recorded in the book of Ezra, breathed life into a people who had wept by the rivers of Babylon, longing for Zion. The Israelites received the proclamation with joy and thanksgiving. This was not merely political permission, but the fulfillment of a sacred dream. Groups gathered, preparing for the arduous journey home. Their hearts burned with resolve to rebuild their lives and restore the temple, the holy dwelling place of their God. The journey was difficult, the road long and fraught with obstacles, yet hope carried them forward. Upon arriving in Jerusalem, they found ruins awaiting their labor. With determination, they began to lay the foundations of a new temple. Stone by stone, the sanctuary of the Lord rose again, a living testament of faith and perseverance. Though distant, Cyrus continued to uphold his promise, ensuring their protection and support. His decree stood not merely as human law, but as a divine instrument in the great plan of history. The rebuilding of the temple symbolized not only restoration of worship, but the renewal of identity and communion with the God of their fathers. When Darius ascended the Persian throne, he confirmed the decrees of Cyrus, ensuring continued support for the temple's reconstruction. He commanded that resources be supplied for the work. and that the exiles should not be hindered in their mission. More than that, he declared that anyone who opposed the rebuilding of the temple in Jerusalem would be counted as an adversary of the great Persian Empire and judged accordingly. Thus, under the decree of Darius, the returning exiles gained courage. Their task was heavy, the ruins many, the opposition fierce, yet they labored on, protected by both divine providence and imperial authority. Jerusalem, long desolate, began to stir with life once again. With each stone placed upon another, the people reclaimed not only their city, but their covenant with God. And so, amid struggle and hope, ruin and renewal, the story of Israel entered a new chapter, one of restoration, faith, and the unshakable reminder that kingdoms rise and fall, but the purposes of the Lord endure forever. In the quiet of long days of labor, the exiles experienced both the weight of hardship and the joy of small daily victories. They faced hostile lands and local conflicts as they raised the walls, brick by brick, stone upon stone. Each action seemed like an epic battle between the beauty of the dream and the harshness of reality. Among the simple tools, the whispers of mutual encouragement bound the community together as the careful steps of reconstruction moved forward. In this setting of toil and challenge arose the recognition that they were not alone. The unseen presence of Darius was felt through the protection offered by his decrees. His influence encouraged not only firm hands at work, but also courage in the hearts of the exiles, who felt sustained by a power greater than their calloused hands. And so, the rebuilding of the temple, which had begun as a distant dream, took shape beneath the watchful gaze of the surrounding hills. The walls began to rise in a dance of faith and determination. And in the midst of it all, a thread of hope illuminated the growing city, promising a future where the sound of renewed worship would once again echo in those ancient courts. As time passed, and the stones laid out traced the prophetic outline of a new beginning, the Israelites prepared themselves for the continuation of their saga. With the support of Darius, a faithful ally in a time of renewal, their lives became a living testimony to the power of divine and human alliances that transcended space and time. With strengthened voices and renewed hearts, they stood firm, ready to face any challenge that might arise, on the path toward the full redemption of their people. In ancient times, when the winds of the Middle East carried tales of mighty empires, Shalmaneser, king of Assyria, advanced with his formidable army. His fame as a conqueror was no mere rumor. It was a reality that spread fear among the nations. Within this context of power and expansion, Shalmaneser set his eyes upon Israel. The kingdom of Israel, with its capital in Samaria, faced dark and troubled days. Internally, disputes and corruption weakened the nation, leaving it vulnerable. Externally, the constant threat of Assyria weighed heavily upon the hearts of the people and the kings of the north, who scarcely knew a peaceful night's sleep. Assyria was rising, and its military hosts were seen as a sign of impending destruction. And then, with relentless determination, Shalmaneser chose to invade Israel. This was no mere raid. It was a calculated campaign. With strategic precision, he laid siege to Samaria. For 3 years, the Assyrian armies maintained their merciless blockade. The city, clinging to its last reserves, resisted bravely. But resistance could not endure forever. Supplies dwindled, defenses weakened, and the spirit of the people began to break. Surrender was inevitable. The Assyrians captured Samaria, sealing the fate of the kingdom of Israel. But victory came at a cruel cost to the Israelites. Many were exiled, torn from their homes and carried off to distant and unfamiliar lands. The Assyrian practice of deporting conquered peoples was part of their strategy of control. By scattering and redistributing populations, they sought to dissolve resistance and enforce cultural assimilation. Across the plains of Israel remained only the memory of a nation that had once flourished under godly kings, now scattered like chaff before the wind. The voices and faces of the exiles reflected a story of trials and tears. They did not yet know how their fate would be woven into the great mosaic of their ancestors' history. The kings of the north, who once ruled with pride and conviction, now saw their legacy threatened by a power too vast to withstand. Assyria was a force to be feared, a looming shadow haunting their decisions. They lived beneath the weight of Shalmaneser's advance, an onslaught that left wounds too deep to heal. From Samaria to the outer towns, the people of Israel struggled to comprehend the betrayal of fortune. The scars of war were visible not only in the scorched landscape, but also in the hearts of the survivors. The sound of Assyrian trumpets echoed in the ruins, mingled with whispered prayers over a devastated land. And so, as the winds carried the dust of conquered fields, the Israelites entered a new chapter of their story, one to be told to future generations with both sorrow and hope. It was the end of an era, and those who remained gazed toward the horizon, contemplating an uncertain future, shaped by ancient promises and new trials. After the dark winds of Assyrian exile had scattered the hopes of Israel, a new possibility arose on the horizon. In the land of the Persians, Cyrus, a king of renown, made decisions that would change the course of history. Upon ascending the throne, his heart inclined toward the Jews, long exiled from their beloved Jerusalem. With uncommon resolve, Cyrus issued a decree. The Jews were permitted to return to their homeland and rebuild the temple of the Lord. His words were not mere permission, but a spark of hope lit in a land of despair. Zerubbabel, a leader among the Jews, rose to the challenge with courage and faith. He took the responsibility of leading a company of Israelites back to Jerusalem. The journey was long and filled with uncertainty, but the vision of restoring the temple strengthened every step of those who followed him. Arriving at the city, now but a shadow of its former glory, they set to work. Stone upon stone, Zerubbabel and his companions devoted themselves to the sacred task of restoring the house of worship, a monumental mission requiring unwavering faith and perseverance. As the temple walls began once more to rise toward heaven, Ezra arrived to fulfill a crucial role. As a scribe and priest, he recognized that more than walls of stone were needed. The hearts of the people themselves required rebuilding. Thus Ezra devoted himself to teaching the law of Moses to those returned from captivity. In squares and gatherings he read and explained the scriptures, reviving in the Jewish heart a sense of identity and divine purpose. But it was not only the temple that needed rebuilding. The city's defenses lay in ruins. Nehemiah, a leader stirred by deep love for his people and land, emerged as the central figure in repairing Jerusalem's broken walls. Facing fierce opposition and immense obstacles, he organized his brethren to work with tools in one hand and vigilance in the other. Every stone set into place was a symbol of their resilience and faith. These joint efforts, Cyrus's decree, Zerubbabel's leadership, Ezra's teaching, and Nehemiah's resolve, were essential in rekindling Jewish hope after long years of exile. As Jerusalem slowly came back to life, the legacy of these leaders endured, carved into the stones they raised and written in the scrolls passed to coming generations. The return to the land was not merely physical. It was the restoration of faith, identity, and the enduring truth that beyond trials and scattering, there is always the promise of renewal. Herod the Great, a name that echoes through the corridors of time, was a king remembered for immense ambition and an iron hand. When he became ruler of Judea with Roman backing, he ushered in an era of monumental building projects that transformed the land. Determined to leave behind an immortal legacy, he embarked upon one of his greatest undertakings, the rebuilding of the Temple of Jerusalem. The original temple, already revered in the eyes of the Jews, was to Herod an opportunity to display his power and secure favor from his subjects. He would not be content merely to rebuild. His plan was to expand and magnify the sacred structure, making it more splendid than ever before. Stones were cut with precision. The finest gold and materials adorned the work, and the cries of countless laborers filled the air as Herod's vision took form. Amid the fervor of labor, a temple arose that would shine beneath the desert sun, a testimony of glory, ambition, and the intertwining of human pride with the sacred hopes of a nation. And while the temple rose in magnificence, history reserved for Herod another kind of infamy. Upon hearing from the Magi, who had come from the east, about the birth of a king of the Jews, the heart of Herod became a storm of fear and jealousy. The Magi, wise astrologers, had followed a star that guided them to the special child, and in their search they came to Herod, assuming that the palace would be the place of his birth. Instead of rejoicing at the news, Herod felt his throne threatened. He received the Magi with outward courtesy and cunning, instructing them to find the child and then return to him, so that he too might worship him. Yet Herod's true intentions were far darker. When the Magi, warned in a dream, chose not to return to him, the king gave a dreadful order that would stain his memory forever. In his desperation to eliminate any threat to his rule, Herod ordered the massacre of the innocents in Bethlehem. Soldiers were sent to kill all boys 2 years old and under, a deed of cruelty that would echo with sorrow through generations. Amidst tears and grief, the lament of mothers resounded, their hopes shattered by the sword. Despite his genius in architecture and strategy, Herod is remembered in many accounts more for his tyranny and paranoia than for his achievements. His works, like the rebuilt temple, would continue to inspire awe for ages. Yet his actions, driven by the anxiety of clinging to power, left a dark stain on his legacy. The stones of the temple would continue to bear witness to Jewish devotion, but the bitter memory of the massacre would fill the oral traditions with grief and suffering. Herod reigned until his final breath, a life that inspired both fear and awe, a ruler who would stop at nothing to achieve his ends, no matter the cost. Thus history moved forward, with the hope of redemption lighting a path overshadowed by the deeds of the past. Herod Antipas, son of Herod the Great, ruled Galilee and Perea with the same cunning hand he had inherited from his father. Among his many concerns was John the Baptist, a respected prophet who drew multitudes and spoke harshly against Herod's personal life. John openly denounced Herod's marriage to Herodias, who had once been the wife of his half-brother Philip. To John, this union was unlawful, and he did not hesitate to proclaim it. Though torn between respect for the prophet and the need to maintain authority, Herod eventually imprisoned John. He confined him in a dungeon, perhaps hoping to appease the growing unrest among his more devout subjects. Herodias, however, harbored a bitter grudge against John. The prophet's words had struck not only at her marriage, but at her honor. She longed for an opportunity to silence him once and for all. That opportunity arose at Herod's birthday feast. A lavish celebration was held, filled with banquets and honored guests. Among the evening's entertainments, Salome, daughter of Herodias, performed a dance that captivated Herod and his companions. Her graceful and mesmerizing performance won not only applause, but also Herod's indulgent promise. In a moment of intoxicated delight, Herod swore before all present that he would grant Salome whatever she asked, even up to half his kingdom. Guided by her mother's vengeful counsel, Salome returned with a shocking request: the head of John the Baptist on a platter. Herod was deeply troubled. He did not wish to kill John, but bound by his public oath and compelled by political pressure and honor, he yielded. Reluctantly, he sent an executioner to the prison, and soon a tragic scene unfolded amidst the feast. John's head was brought to the banquet, delivered to Salome, who in turn gave it to Herodias. The prophet, who had spoken truth without fear, was silenced in brutal fashion. For Herod, it was a fleeting relief, but one that carried a heavy burden of conscience that would echo long thereafter. Thus, the scene at Herod's court unfolded as a tangled web of power, vengeance, and rash decisions. While the festivities continued, the shadow of John's execution lingered, a reminder of the passions and corruption that simmer beneath the glittering surface of power. In the loneliness of the dungeon and the echoes of revelry, John the Baptist's story reached its cruel conclusion, leaving an indelible mark upon the history of the time and upon the hearts of those who remembered his words and deeds. In Jerusalem, during those days of uncertainty and shifting tides, times were restless under the reign of Herod Agrippa. This monarch, resolute and calculating, emerged as a powerful and ruthless figure, known for his harsh measures against the fledgling Christian movement. Herod Agrippa, ascending the throne with indispensable Roman support, carefully guarded his political and religious alliances, striking hard against any threat that might disturb his dominion. For the followers of Jesus, whose numbers were steadily growing, his presence was a constant reminder of sharp opposition, not only because they challenged the entrenched religious order, but because they unsettled the fragile political balance that Agrippa worked to preserve. In this atmosphere of mounting tension, Herod ordered the execution of James, one of the apostles closest to Jesus. James, the brother of John, was seized unexpectedly and in a public display of power was struck down by the sword. This shocking act was not merely an attempt to halt Christianity's spread, but a devastating blow to the early church, which looked to James and the other apostles as living witnesses of their master's teaching and message. With James's death fresh in memory, Agrippa turned his eyes to another target, Peter, the undeniable leader among the apostles, fiery in his preaching. Peter's words stirred the hearts of many. Herod, eager to solidify his influence and appease the increasingly agitated religious leaders, quickly ordered Peter's arrest. His imprisonment cast a shadow of fear over the Christian community, yet it also ignited fervent chains of prayer as the faithful cried out for a miracle. And astonishingly, a miracle came. In the stillness of night, while the prison was heavily guarded and Peter slept bound between two soldiers, an extraordinary event occurred. A radiant light filled the cell, and an angel of the Lord appeared beside him. With a gentle touch, the angel woke Peter and urged him to rise quickly. The chains fell from his wrists, and the angel commanded him to dress and follow. Together, they passed silently through the corridors, the guards oblivious, the gates opening of their own accord. Only when Peter found himself outside, free beneath the night sky, did he realize his deliverance was no dream, but a true miracle. Not long after this wondrous deliverance, Herod Agrippa's own life met a sudden and tragic end. During a grand public address, clad in dazzling robes that glittered like silver in the sun, he presented himself with the pomp of a deity. The crowd, enthralled and overcome with irrational fervor, shouted praises, declaring that his voice was not of a man, but of a god. Inflated by their adulation, Herod failed to give glory to the true God of heaven. And in that moment of unmeasured pride, he was struck with a grievous affliction, and his life quickly ebbed away, leaving the people aghast. The chilling death of Herod Agrippa was seen by many as a divine warning, a sign from heaven. With his sudden fall, a temporary calm fell upon the persecuted Christians of Jerusalem, as though a great burden had been lifted. From the savage persecutions, the miraculous deliverance of Peter, to the dramatic downfall of Herod, these events formed a powerful narrative of faith and courage. Their lessons echoed through generations, inspiring and strengthening communities, even as they awaited the unfolding of the next chapter in this extraordinary journey of faith and perseverance. Isaiah lifted his voice in times of uncertainty and disobedience. With a heavy heart, he warned the kings of Judah, often entangled in unjust practices and intoxicated with power. He walked the streets of Jerusalem, observing the strife and divisions that threatened to corrode the kingdom. Known for his fervent devotion, Isaiah did not shrink from addressing kings directly, urging them to put aside growing idolatry and return to the true path of righteousness and justice. During the turbulent reign of Judah's last kings arose Jeremiah, a prophet of indomitable courage. Jeremiah was no stranger to danger, even when his words were met with hostility and scorn. On the throne, the kings, increasingly self-absorbed, often ignored his warnings. Yet Jeremiah proclaimed without hesitation, "Amend your ways and your deeds, and obey the voice of the Lord." His words echoed in the public squares, but were often drowned out by the arrogance of rulers. Each cry was a desperate attempt to redirect a kingdom already sliding toward ruin. Isaiah and Jeremiah were not alone. Other prophets, equally devoted, rose up against the idolatry that spread under the reign of Judah's kings. Many turned to foreign gods, embracing practices opposed to the law. The prophets thundered against this unfaithfulness, calling the people to repentance. But spiritual blindness often proves stronger than truth. and the kings kept their ears closed to the divine warnings. The consequences of such neglect were inevitable and dire. One after another, the kings of Judah suffered grave setbacks. The ignored words of the prophets culminated in calamity. Cities under siege, despair mounting among the people. Isaiah and Jeremiah, tireless and unyielding, witnessed the unfolding of the ruin they had tried so fervently to prevent. The accounts of those prophets echo still, a mixture of resistance and lament, interwoven with rare glimpses of hope and salvation. Isaiah and Jeremiah, reluctant at times but never wavering, pressed on in their mission, even when confronted with the hardened hearts of Judah's rulers, who refused the call of the Eternal. The fate of the kings who followed only confirmed what Isaiah, Jeremiah, and others had foretold. The accumulated weight of idolatry and injustice brought downfall like an unstoppable tide. Yet the words of the prophets remain, inscribed in history as testimonies of the ceaseless struggle between unbridled human rule and the uncompromising call to holiness, a call for a people who were never meant to forget their covenant. Jeroboam, a young servant of King Solomon, walked an unexpected path. After Solomon's death, the United Kingdom of Israel was divided. Jeroboam rose as the first king of the newly formed northern kingdom, Israel. Leading the 10 tribes, he faced the challenge of consolidating power and loyalty among his people. Distancing himself from the rituals centered on David's house in Jerusalem, Jeroboam built altars at Bethel and Dan, introducing idolatrous practices that broke with ancient traditions. His decision brought tension, yet secured his rule over the north. Baasha emerged as a formidable figure amidst the power struggles that followed in Israel. Challenging the reign of Nadab, Jeroboam's son Baasha wove a series of conspiracies, advancing steadily toward the throne. His days were marked by palace intrigue and coups, making him a symbol of the inner turmoil that plagued Israel. Yet his hunger for power sowed the seeds of future division, leaving a legacy fractured and weakened. Perhaps none embodied the corruption and religious decay in Israel more than Ahab, a king whose name became inextricably linked to the worship of Baal. Ahab, under the influence of his wife Jezebel, strengthened pagan practices that provoked the wrath of the prophets of Yahweh. The height of idolatry was reached when temples and altars to Baal were widely established, testing the faith and endurance of those who still revered the God of Israel. Ahab proved a leader of complexity and contradictions, fostering foreign practices that obscured the ancestral beliefs of the people. It was Jehu who brought an end to Ahab's final dynasty, acting with relentless resolve to destroy the legacy that Ahab and Jezebel had cultivated. Amid fierce conspiracies, Jehu orchestrated a series of decisive actions, including the execution of Ahab's descendants and his supporters. In a dramatic and bloody turn, Jehu ascended the throne of Israel, vowing to purge the kingdom of evil influences and to restore order in the face of chaos. His path, though stained by violence, revealed an attempt to renew Israel's spiritual identity. The journey of the people and their kings in Israel was ever intertwined with earthly ambitions and a profound cry for spiritual truth. The figures of Jeroboam, Baasha, Ahab, and Jehu emerge not merely as individuals, but as protagonists in the complex narratives of ancient Israel. Their reigns, marked by highs and lows, illustrated the ever-present dilemma between temporal power and the pursuit of the divine. The history of the kings of Israel remains alive, a tapestry of human struggles and the perseverance of faith under the ancient sign of the covenant with the eternal. Isaiah walked the bustling streets of Jerusalem as though each step upon the uneven stones recounted a story of ancient Israel, his eyes watching the people and the court with the keen insight of a seasoned prophet. The city was alive with whispered conversations and the clamor of merchants. Yet behind this apparent vitality, there lay a palpable tension in the air, almost tangible, nestled between the vast palace walls and hidden in the sacred shadows of the ancient temples. It was a time of uncertainty, when men, wrapped in their ambitions and worldly desires, knelt before idols of gold and silver, blind to the subtle and dangerous deviation of their hearts from the true way of the Lord. Endowed with the burning word of God, Isaiah did not hesitate to lift his mighty voice amid the complacent quiet of kings and nobles who ruled over the people. With an authority that transcended the worldly appearance of wealth and power, he warned them of the insidious dangers of idolatry. "Turn away," he proclaimed with passion, "from the crooked paths that lead you from the truth of Yahweh." His words were like flaming arrows, piercing the defenses built by hardened hearts, an urgent warning against the treacherous snares of placing faith in carved stones, lifeless and without real power. Isaiah, with eyes that saw beyond the veil of appearances, understood that the true strength of a king lay not in numerous troops nor in treasures piled at his feet, but in sincere devotion to the Lord of hosts, the only true sovereign. While Isaiah uttered his illuminated warnings, even darker times drew swiftly near. It was Jeremiah who, bearing the weight of his prophetic vision, witnessed those days of imminent desolation. With eyes trained to see beyond the present, he beheld Jerusalem, the beloved city for which so many had sung and wept, poised upon the brink of ruin. Before the kings of Judah, his words were like thunder splitting the silence, foretelling with certainty the devastating destruction to come if they persisted in senseless rebellion. "The north shall rise," he cried, with the force of a tempestuous wind, "and the walls that protected you shall not stand." Despite Jeremiah's profound pleadings, few listened with their hearts. The city, once fair and radiant like a jewel among the nations, became a continual portent of tears and despair, an embittered echo of the king's failure to hear and heed the voice of God brought to them through the prophets. Yet even in the darkest times, there was always a glimmer of hope, a promise of redemption. Ezekiel, living as an exile in a foreign land, arose as a voice of hope and renewal among his desolate people. He spoke to the scattered ones, his eyes kindled with a vibrant vision of a restored future, a life beyond devastation. "God has not abandoned you," he declared with heartwarming conviction, "for he promises recovery and rebuilding." His message was a gentle melody of tenderness and faith, suggesting that even after total ruin, there would always be a chance to be reborn. Ezekiel shared visions of a new temple, more glorious and holy, of fields once more fruitful and alive, and of the people returning to their promised land, from which they never should have strayed. His promise was clear and bright. After the fierce storm, the sun of justice and mercy would shine again upon Jerusalem. Thus history is interwoven with the prophecies that not only shaped, but also defined the destiny of kings and kingdoms. Isaiah, Jeremiah, and Ezekiel were not merely prophets. They were beacons in a storm-tossed world, guiding with their words those able to hear and understand divine truth. Their heritage lives on, not only in words that speak of ancient times, but also in the immortal promises of a people determined to rediscover faith under the eternal guidance of a sovereign and compassionate God. Beneath every stone, between every line, ancient Israel finds not only errors and collapses, but also the renewed promise of an everlasting covenant, an indestructible bond with the Creator. The leadership of the kings of Israel and Judah is a rich and complex chapter of biblical history. These monarchs, through their decisions and deeds, shaped the destiny of their nations in ways that still resound today. Students of Scripture examine their actions closely, seeking to understand the motivations and challenges they faced. The Old Testament is filled with accounts of kings confronted by hard choices, each bearing significant consequences for their people and their faith. Scholars analyze how these leaders, set in office by dynastic rights or by divine providence, managed their responsibilities and how they responded to the rebuke and guidance delivered by prophets such as Isaiah, Jeremiah, and Ezekiel. The leadership of kings like David and Solomon, for example, displays divine wisdom, yet also profound human failure. David, known as a man after God's own heart, often found the path of redemption after falling into sin. In contrast, Solomon, famed for his wisdom, allowed his downfall to begin with idolatry and foreign alliances. Biblical exegesis, the disciplined method of interpreting sacred texts, helps to unveil the many challenges faced by these kings. Amid internal rivalries and external threats, they constantly had to balance politics and spirituality. Exegesis attends carefully to cultural and historical contexts, allowing a deeper understanding of royal decisions and their practical and spiritual implications. Biblical historians devote themselves to interpreting the choices of these monarchs in the light of the times in which they lived. For instance, King Josiah's religious reform is seen not only as a renewal of Jewish faith, but also as a desperate response to political and moral crises. His efforts to destroy idols and to centralize worship to Yahweh were bold moves to restore his people's religious and cultural identity in the face of mounting external pressures. Every royal decision, from political alliances to religious reforms, testifies to how these leaders were shaped by their personal convictions and the environments in which they lived. Those choices reverberate through time, influencing not only the course of ancient nations, but also offering enduring lessons about governance, faith, and the role of moral courage in adversity. The kings of the Old Testament thus provide a rich field of study, not only for grasping biblical history, but also for reflecting on the timeless challenges of leadership and spirituality. As we deepen our understanding of these historical figures, we discover that despite the temporal distance, their stories resonate with equal force today. Looking back at narratives filled with victories and defeats, we gain insight into the human heart and the endless search for connection with the divine. As we follow this journey through the biblical accounts, we are called to observe how, often in the darkest moments of weakness, there also lies the promise of light and hope, a renewal that only true devotion can bring. Each king influenced the tribes in a different and unique way. When Saul, the first king of Israel, rose to the throne, he was faced with the monumental task of uniting a nation composed of tribes that often had conflicting interests. The narrative describes how he used military strategies to win the respect and loyalty of tribes such as Benjamin, while striving to hold back the Philistines. His actions on the battlefield echoed even among other clans, cementing his position as a strong leader, though his reign proved to be tumultuous. The rise of David brought new challenges and opportunities. David, with his political skill and personal charisma, was able to unify the tribes into a single front, negotiating alliances through blood ties and strategic marriages. This move was essential, especially when conflicts flared up between tribes over territory and autonomy. For example, Judah and Israel, often in tension, saw in David a mediator who could bring reconciliation. Yet his policies were not without controversy, particularly when he aspired to establish Jerusalem as the capital, provoking mixed feelings among the northern tribes. The wars between kingdoms under different reigns often deeply affected tribal alliances. Under Solomon, the kingdom experienced a time of relative peace and prosperity. But after his death, the kingdom was divided. The battle lines that formed between Israel in the north and Judah in the south set off conflicts that, in many cases, decimated tribal communities. During the reigns of kings such as Jeroboam and Rehoboam, alliances were constantly forged and broken, dividing families and opening wounds that endured for generations. These battles were not only physical, but also spiritual, in a continuous struggle over where to centralize worship and which god to serve. The kings also played a crucial role in determining tributes and taxes, which directly affected the tribal economy. Under Solomon's rule, for instance, extensive building projects demanded heavy tributes, eloquently paid by the citizens, generating dissatisfaction among many tribes that were overburdened by high taxes and forced labor. This economic policy sowed the seeds of division, which erupted after his death, when accumulated tension contributed to the kingdom's split. The dynamic policies of kings regarding territory also provoked significant migrations among the tribes. During the reign of notable kings such as Ahab, the emphasis on establishing borders and expanding territories led many to relocate, seeking new lands or fleeing imminent conflicts. These forced migrations not only transformed the landscape of Israel and Judah, but also profoundly influenced intertribal interactions, affecting deeply rooted cultural and social bonds. Thus, the kings of the Old Testament, with their decisions and policies, shaped the destiny of the tribes in irreversible ways. Their actions, whether through alliances, wars, or tributes, left profound marks that still reverberate in the biblical narratives. Saul, a tall and imposing man from the tribe of Benjamin, was chosen to be the first king of Israel. He stood out not only for his physical stature, but also for his skill on the battlefield, which earned him respect among his people. Yet this role did not come without its difficulties. Upon assuming the throne, Saul faced the colossal challenge of uniting the diverse and often discordant tribes of Israel. With shrewd military strategies, he sought to win the support of the tribes, a task that unfolded between internal cohesion and the constant struggle against external foes such as the Philistines, who threatened the stability of the young nation. While Saul fought his battles, an unexpected figure began to emerge from the fields of Bethlehem. David, a young shepherd boy, the son of Jesse, was anointed by Samuel as the future king of Israel, an act that surprised many, including David's own family. This moment was full of symbolism, highlighting the idea that God often sees what men cannot. From that point on, David's life changed drastically, catapulting him into the center of attention. The story of David intertwined with that of Goliath, the Philistine giant who mocked and challenged the troops of Israel. David, armed only with his faith and a sling, defeated Goliath in a stunning way, becoming a hero throughout Israel. This victory not only brought fame to David, but also made him a new symbol of hope for many Israelites who longed for change and divine leadership. In Saul's court, the atmosphere began to shift. David's friendship with Jonathan, Saul's son, transcended family and political barriers, becoming an extraordinary bond of loyalty and brotherly love. Jonathan, recognizing God's hand upon David, protected his friend even when his father's intentions toward David turned threatening. This friendship is a powerful testimony of commitment and understanding, demonstrating that even in times of instability and distrust, sincere bonds can form and withstand external pressures. Yet Saul's reign declined as jealousy and insecurity took root. David became a target of envy for Saul, who saw David's growing popularity as a direct threat to his throne. Rivalry began to consume Saul, who sought ways to destroy David, even as David continued to serve loyally. On the other hand, David, in his integrity, chose not to retaliate, showing respect for the king anointed by God, even when his own life was in danger. Thus, the destiny that began with the choice of Saul as Israel's first king took an extraordinary turn with the anointing of David. Each moment, from David's anointing, his victory over Goliath, to his friendship with Jonathan, prepared the way for significant changes, both in the political and spiritual landscape of Israel, where personal and collective conflicts intricately intertwined the stories of kings, warriors, and friends, with far-reaching consequences. David now stood at the threshold of a new chapter in his journey, emerging as a central figure in the Old Testament. The stories of the kings, particularly David, left indelible marks on the first followers of Jesus and consequently influenced the New Testament. When you consider the teachings of Jesus, the connection to the leadership of the kings of the past becomes clear and profound. The early believers saw in the stories of David's faith and courage examples to be followed. Imagine David, the young shepherd who became king, whose actions shaped traditions that still echo to this day. Each decision, each battle, and each psalm written by David served as inspiration, preserved and honored by those who would later follow Jesus. The accounts of David illustrated a unique combination of boldness and devotion, qualities that the early Christians sought in their own leaders. Thus, the heritage of kings like David not only shaped ancient stories, but also laid the foundations of Christian traditions through the centuries. The real stories of the kings also inspired the early followers of Jesus in practical ways. When the early Christians faced adversity, they remembered how David faced Goliath with courage and skill. David's example became a symbol of strength through faith. In the same way, the political and relational complications lived by kings like Saul and his dynasty offered lessons about the dangers of jealousy and mistrust. The leadership demonstrated by these kings, despite their failures, offered models of behavior that became fundamental to the first Christian communities. The idea that a leader must be a faithful servant was rooted in the stories of these ancient monarchs, where service to the people and obedience to God were more important than personal ambition. Yet the complexity of Israel's royalty also offered a portrait of humanity, full of victories and defeats. As the legacy of these kings was passed down, each detail of their lives became an intricate tapestry of narrative, rich with wisdom and dramatic moments. As you reflect on the influence of the kings of the past, consider how their stories continue to touch lives and inform the faith of millions. What began there, in the lands of ancient Israel, echoes in the practices and beliefs that nourished the growth of Christianity. The kings, with their extraordinary lives, continue to whisper through the pages of Scripture, reminding us that in every generation there are leaders whose stories guide and inspire in unexpected ways. And so, David's journey advanced, intertwining at every step with the greater narrative of the kings of Israel, preparing the way for a new era where the impact of these stories would manifest in even deeper and more enduring ways. This crucial transition shaped not only the monarchy of Israel, but also the very foundations upon which entire communities would build their understandings of leadership and faith. As we conclude this journey through the biblical reigns, it is clear how the stories of the kings, especially that of David, continue to inspire us. The courage to face challenges and the unwavering faith are eternal lessons that still speak directly to our hearts. These stories are interwoven with the growth of Christianity, shaping understandings of leadership and devotion. Which king of the Bible has most caught your attention? We would love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Share your experiences and let us know what touched you most. Thank you for watching and reflecting with us on these rich narratives. Do not forget to subscribe to the channel, A Vision of Heaven, for more content like this, and share this video with friends who may benefit from these stories of faith and leadership. May we continue exploring the Scriptures and allowing these stories to echo in our daily lives.
Until next time, and may you continue to be inspired by these powerful lessons.